Hello, everyone. Our topic is marijuana and deportation. My name is Brenda.
I'm Yaxi Serrano.
I'm Irvin Morales.
And I'm Lisbeth Ramirez.
So the first location that we found, I found was near my home. So it is east of, it's called East of Eden Cannabis Co. Salinas, and this is located right by John Street. So it's in front of a Starbucks. It's in the corner of a Starbucks, and then right next to that Starbucks, there's a homeless shelter, and this dispensary is always busy. Most of the people that go there are Hispanics, and it's always busy. They have anything that you want, so from edibles to vape pens, wax, anything they have there. And they do offer curbside pickup and delivery to your home.
All right, so the next location is here in Asperia. It's basically a farm where they cultivate weed, and it doesn't necessarily have a name to it, but it is fairly close to Los Angeles, which means that there's a lot of immigrant communities living there. And oftentimes these immigrants who live within Los Angeles travel to outer parts of California so that they're able to find work without any regulations. So mostly the people that we see farming here would be immigrants, and especially Latinos, since they're more likely to find that kind of work and be willing to do that type of work instead of native Californian residents.
The next spot is a billboard off of the 78 freeway, right in between Twin Oaks exit and off of Grand Avenue. It is facing going towards Vista, so it's right by the university campus. I think it's important to acknowledge that it is there because it is right by a very known area where there's going to be young people. There is a lot of Latino community in the area, and it is facing towards where it is going to be going to. The spot that it's actually at is 1745 East Vista Way, and it's called Off the Charts. And it is going to be in Vista, which is an even more predominantly Latino community. And it is it is a full dispensary that has all like CBD like products, THC products, and all of that.
And the last location is going to be another billboard on East Vista Way, which is pretty much like the northern part of Vista on the way to Bonzo and Fallbrook up there. And it's pretty much like a colorful billboard that attracts a lot of people who drive by it. And it advertises dispensaries and other, sort of cannabis and marijuana related advertisements. Um, so that people can visit it and know where to go. And it's just a way to attract more people to go to the dispensaries. Good way to make business and hopefully attract more customers in the future.
Okay, so next we're going to be moving on to our presentation.
Okay, so our group chose to focus on both marijuana and deportation and combine them in a way in order to see if there's an impact see if if it has an impact on the Latinx communities. Oftentimes native residents are able to, sort of bypass the consequences of having marijuana possession, unlike other ethnic groups such as the Black or Latino community, who have been targets of discriminatory arrests and have left to a lot of law enforcement agencies like the DEA, cops, ICE, and CBP getting involved. Members of the Latinx community are continuously at risk for deportation if they are illegal residents. However, the risk increases immensely if they are low level, if they commit low level crimes, if they already have, low level crimes on their records or something like that. There's always been this association between Latinos and marijuana, and you can say that it started in the late 60s during the Vietnam War protests, during the peace movement and the Chicano movement, um, when it grew in the country. And in response to this, the government and the media as well, a little bit, would start to heavily attack anti-war protesters and the Chicanx community, and report anything on them and any drug-related crimes that they committed. And over time, during the last few decades of the 20th century and the start of the millennium, arrest rates, deportation rates, and the prison population of the Latinx community would skyrocket to outrageous numbers. Many of these have been marijuana-related crimes, not necessarily offensive or inherently evil crimes. And countless people have suffered excessive punishment for these crimes, despite it being legal now in some states. And it makes you wonder if it's fair for those people who are serving long sentences in prison for the marijuana related crimes, if they should continue to be in prison for something, that's not that serious of a crime. And so the next section is our research studies and literature review. So my three sources, um, the first one talks about pretty much the history of the prohibition of marijuana, how it started in, I believe, the 18th or the 19th century, I believe, and how minorities, especially the Latino community, have been heavily associated and racially profiled, pretty much discriminated against, and how law enforcement agencies have been able to target them, um, and pretty much arrest a bunch of them for like not necessarily the right reasons. It's just a way to make arrests, um, and increase, prison population and deportations. And so my second article pretty much talks about how in the last decade or so, there have been a huge number of changes in the criminal justice system regarding marijuana. This article pretty much went over how in states where weed is already legal, but still have convicted felons for marijuana related crimes from back when it was still illegal. It reminds people of this idea of retroactive legality, a term that explains how people seek to restore um, convicted felons who have already been committed of marijuana related crimes, tries to bring them back to society as if they had never committed any actual crime, which would be a very revolutionizing concept, especially those who are serving time right now. And it would also confront the modern criminal justice system, possibly on a federal level, and potentially cause some controversy at the national political level. And so my last source, it talks about the history of deportation in the U.S., but it also mentions a little bit about how the American criminal justice and immigration system has heavily criminalized the Latinx community and other racial groups in the past few centuries. Many other countries have sort of copied this immigration policy by America to increase their national security and protect their country from any, foreign potential threats. American immigration would be very complicated, or has become very complicated, as white European immigrants have been easily able to come into the U.S. in comparison to Latin American or Asian immigrants seeking a better life in America. But in recent history, many undocumented immigrants who have already been convicted of drug-related crimes were bound to face serious consequences, such as, deportation or something worse.
All right, so my article is mainly focused on the review of immigratory law and often how that affects Latinx communities. And the first article talked about this idea of Immigration and Nationality, Immigration and Nationality Act, which defines conviction in such a way that even civil infractions with incredibly low penalties count as drug convictions that make lawful permanent residents deportable, meaning that immigrants, especially within the Latinx and other similar communities who live within this country, can be deported on very minimal criminal offenses, such as possession of marijuana. And although marijuana is legal within California, this still doesn't allow any leeway between this immigratory law. So they're often forced to leave the country, even though they have built their livelihood upon working here and providing for their family. They're often not giving any second chances, and they're deported even with just one criminal offense that may be minor and even a misdemeanor. The second article I found talked about just the changes within immigratory law and how in a day of age where illegal residents are already stigmatized so often and put in this category as outsiders, immigration law continues to be severely punishable to Latinx individuals, and felonies do not allow immigrants the opportunity to return back to the US, and how Congress's definition of a felony within immigration law is different from the felony we know, just as regular civil law. It doesn't necessarily mean a high criminal offense. In this case, especially within immigration law, it means just low-level offenses that are even legal within the state, such as drug-based offenses or drug-based misdemeanors, or any criminal offense that similar forces residents who aren't legal within the state to be deported, and it eliminates any possibilities of a fair removal proceeding or a court proceeding to take place, so that that person being deported has their rights and has a fair trial.
So for my first article, it talks about how kids that are born, like that their parents are undocumented, how it affects them. So according to this article, 16.6 million people in the United States live in families in which at least one family member is undocumented immigrant. In this article, it also explains how teenagers whose parents are undocumented are more likely to use cannabis than non-Hispanic whites. The reason why is because their parents experience more barriers and obstacles living in this country. For example, language barrier, cultural differences, and housing. Undocumented parents have to work twice as hard in order to make ends meet and provide for their families. Based on a study that was made on this article, the reason why adolescents use cannabis is because of their parents not being involved or spending enough time with them. I think this is understandable because, like I said, they have it harder than people that have like citizenships here, and they're forced to work twice as hard. So, for example, when most of the parents, so 75% of undocumented parents work in the agriculture industry. So when it's harvest season, so like during the summer, they have to work long hours and sometimes even Sundays in order to save up money, and so they can have something during the winter when there's no work. And for my second article, so this article talks about how a teenage boy, an 18-year-old boy, was caught at school with vape pens and marijuana, and he was automatically deported just for that. So it's not a surprise that Black and brown communities have been incarcerated at much higher rates than whites for cannabis use. Even though weed is legal in California and many other states, it does not mean it's legal usage for everyone because it is still a federal law substance. Immigrants who use cannabis as a source of medical reasons or recreational usage can put their legal status in jeopardy. In this case study, it explains how one mistake of a teenage boy carrying cannabis led him to deportation. Jonathan Torres was a senior in high school when he got caught selling marijuana, wax, and vape pens on campus. He was arrested instantly and taken to ICE because of his legal status in this country. This was his first time ever doing anything like that or getting in trouble with the law. According to his mother, he was a good student and son who liked school and sports. This case study shows that not only do brown and Black communities are more likely to be incarcerated, but also deported. With this being said, there is a racial disparity in marijuana arrests. Not everyone gets arrested or deported or the same sentences. And then for my lastly, for the last article, it talks about how Congress is trying to pass a bill where undocumented people don't get affected by the marijuana usage. So lastly, due to high demand on recreational usage, Congress is fighting for a new bill where marijuana offenses would no longer get immigrants deported. According to human rights, 3,400 immigrants were deported from 2007 to 2012 for cannabis use. Congress continues to fight for this bill to pass. They argue that the federal government should not be wasting resources to wreck immigrants' families due to cannabis use, but to help out the children who are held in the border camps that are desperate for legal services. So if this were to pass, they would be able to, anyone that has been charged with a marijuana offense, they would be able to try to reapply for DACA or for a visa.
Okay, for the next part, I'm going to talk about the marijuana related charges that build deportation cases. So the article briefly states that US immigration will continue to use the federal laws involving marijuana as a basis to deport undocumented immigrants. Immigration and Customs Enforcement, also known as ICE, will continue using their tactics of using marijuana possession, distribution, and convictions as ways to build up deportation cases. To fully back ICE and what they are trying to go for, the Trump administration has also called marijuana a gateway drug that will lead to the use of harder drugs. The drug prohibition and the criminalization of immigrants. The drug policies in the United States have loosened up within the last couple of years. However, Latino and Black incarceration numbers have only gone up. The undocumented community has also been detained and deported on drug-related cases. Author Sarah Tosh uses the term crimmigration, which captures how the intertwining of criminal and immigration policy and enforcement enhances the punitive and exclusionary potential of both systems. So going along with Trump's immigration tactics, drug-related deportations are used as a societal scapegoat for the for the social problems of drugs and crimes. The US war on drugs has usually affected how immigration has come to be. So the migrants from Mexico, and as the author calls it, the so-called Northern Triangle, that includes Guatemala, Honduras, and El Salvador. They try to escape the violence and the narcos from their hometowns, but yet face deportation, immigration, and criminal charges once they have reached the States in search of help. So the likelihood of deportations for drug-related crimes and aggravated felonies increase as well, due to the fact that sometimes the migrants that are attempting to cross are violently coerced or required by the coyotes to smuggle drugs for them as a price for their immigration. And if caught with any drugs by the United States, they are seen as drug traffickers. And the diagram below shows how the US war on drugs is basically a circle. So they criminalize the drugs, but then the narco cartel gets power hungry and then involves a lot of violence, leading for their people to go to the US to try to receive help, but they don't, because it's all one big circle.
So the next part is the Latinx and Chicanx communities in real life, or how marijuana and deportation affects these communities. So the first study that I chose, which is titled How Living in the Hood Affects Risky Behaviors Among Latino and African American Youth. It was basically a survey of many Latino and African American communities within the United States, and it measured multiple different factors, from how many immigrants lived in their neighborhoods to the crime rate, and how often they went to school or how willing they were to try marijuana. So it basically found that Latino youth who are children of a one-parent household, meaning a father or single mother or father, have multiple siblings at home and have multiple stressors at home, are more likely to engage in marijuana usage, especially those who have immigrant parents. So this kind of goes to show that if foreign-born neighborhood residents also live within the same neighborhood, then the crime rates go up extensively. And then these Latinx and Chicanx children are then considered sociologically vulnerable by this study, or far more likely than other ethnic groups, which are also teenagers, to engage in risky behaviors such as crime or drug usage.
So for substance use generation in the time in the United States, the study explores a difference between multiple immigrant generations, such as first generation, second generation, or just fresh into the United States, and the genders that use drugs and consume alcohol. However, the statistics that were used were based on the overall results and not just singling them out. The more amount of years an immigrant youth has spent in the United States is associated with the higher risk of alcohol, tobacco, and marijuana use. According to the authors, the first 4 years in the US are crucial to the acquisition of risk behaviors such as substance use among urban immigrant youth. And based on the study, alcohol is seen as a higher use risk with immigrant children growing up in the States, as it is usually what the normal youth tries out first within growing up in the United States and teen culture. And tobacco and marijuana do not really have certain years where they spike in the youth interest. Latinx, oh, sorry.
Okay. So Latinx and Chicanx communities continue to face these stigmas of often being more willing to use marijuana, which in some cases they are, but it depends tremendously on their home background and where they live. And even within those who don't have a permanent legal status within the US, such as DACA recipients, and in my personal experience in working with DACA recipients and their application process, any process truly related to immigration is extremely researched by ICE law enforcement individuals. And even if one small criminal offense is on their record, then they're oftentimes not able to even apply for a legal status within the US. And if that criminal offense wasn't known before by ICE officers, then they have the right, according to immigration law, to deport that individual. So it's just a very unfair system overall. And leading to the conclusion, although Prop 64 has been allowed, Californian residents have the opportunity to consume small portions of marijuana legally, but this still has not taken into account how this may affect Latinx communities. Latinx immigrants are often continuously targeted without reason and simply due to ICE and law enforcement officer prejudices out in the field. Immigration laws really don't allow immigrants to have second chances at legality within the US. And there's many punitive instances that can occur for committing even the smallest drug offenses, or even in being in possession of a drug that may be considered legal, as marijuana is within California. So it just kind of goes to show you that although a drug can be legalized within a state, it doesn't necessarily allow those same opportunities to every member or every resident within the US, and how illegal immigrants within California are targeted specifically and deported. And these are our references.